Why am I wearing these, you might ask? Well, we're about to find out. I'm going to introduce you to Don. I'm going to pull him up on the screen and we're going to have a little chat. We're going to go from the early days when we first met on a Google Plus photo walk, and we're going to meander right up until today and cover as much as we can in about 30 or 40 minutes. And I know it's going to be rich. I know it's going to be engaging. And Don is a plethora of not just technical knowledge, but he is one of those rare people that combines the artist with the scientist and mashes them together to create what we are about to see in this beautiful creative art. And so I'm going to spotlight you here. I'm going to add you in. Don, welcome to this month's guest interview.
Thank you for having me, Ron. It's been a long time since we've chatted, and so I fully expect us to run the clock out with without a whole lot. I mean, we're going to talk about some really interesting things, some concepts that have been evolving for me. I'm glad that you mentioned the art and the science thing. That's really pivotal, I think, to why why I love photography, because at the core of it, you have to have some of both, right? And everybody has a different mix of it. Some people are really heavy on the art side and they really don't care about what an aperture is and what the camera is actually doing behind the scenes and how light bends and all that. You don't need to. And some people are exactly the opposite. They are obsessed with the gear and the functions and the custom functions and the dials and the apertures and the physics equations and the mathematics, and if you're in film, and the chemistry, and that's fine too. But I find that if you are completely on one side or the other, you're kind of missing the weave, because those two things can be a mesh. And I think the more they can be meshed together, the more magical the end results can be.
I agree. That reminds me of a story. My wife loves to take pictures. She just loves to see the world through the lens. For years, she always got when I upgraded to cameras, she would get my backup body seconds and the lenses and stuff. And she taught me a valuable lesson. She used to take pictures and we used to, she's the green auto. If you're a Nikon shooter, there's green auto on the top. And she used to use green auto and she would shoot thousands of pictures. She's probably not seen more of her pictures than I've not seen the ones that I've taken and not processed yet. But the funny thing is, as I watched her evolve, use the word evolve as a photographer, I saw her producing these wonderful results. And she has literally rebelled against learning the technology of photography and focuses on the viewfinder. And so there's a place in there for everyone, from the person who can pick up a phone and a camera and produce amazing results, to the person who might invest in stereoscopic 3-lens cameras.
Ron, are you talking to me here? Because I have a number of these wonderful cameras, and some of the stuff that I get into photographically, it's not new. I mean, in fact, stereoscopic imagery predates or came about at the same time as photography did, well over 150 years ago. I have an antique stereoscope from 1867. But it's that fascination factor, I think, that is really important. So long as you're fascinated by it, like you have a drive, a passion for it, it doesn't have to be technical, just so long as you're not bored.
Yeah. Speaking of not being bored, I was on a photo walk, probably the first annual Google Plus photo walk, if I recall. Marjorie might correct me. It might have been the second. The first year we started doing these, I did 13 photo walks, and you were probably on a few of those. So,
yep.
But the day I met we met at Nathan Phillips Square. And here comes this guy, Don, that I'd known from the Google Plus platform. And I was just getting to know you, but I didn't really know you. And you had a tripod and a 4x5 camera over your shoulder. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And
one of the things I realized, Ron, is that I'd been on a few photo walks. And oftentimes, the thing is, if I go on a photo walk, like there's been some here in Barrie that I had been on beforehand, and I was never really happy with the images. I mean, they always felt like rushed. You know, you had to keep up with the group. You couldn't really focus
Yeah.
on something for
Yeah.
too long, and so the idea was, how can I A, purposefully slow myself down, and B, the most fun that I was having on those photo walks wasn't actually the end result images. Yes, I would share them with the group, and that was entertaining, but it
I
was
love
kind of a
that.
flash in the pan. Um, but the conversations are what I loved. So
Yeah.
let's make the entire event about having a great conversation with people. And I think I took 6 photos that day.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I only had that much film, and
Yeah.
everybody wanted to see every single photo that I had taken,
Yeah.
because there was so few of them. And if I sat down and set up the camera and lagged behind by 15 minutes and then had to sprint ahead
It had
carrying
to be
this
worth it, right?
gargantuan camera, it had to be worth it. And you know,
So
they weren't great, but it was still fun.
yeah. Yeah. And I got to the point where I started saying that maybe the only camera I should be bringing on a photo walk is this one right here. For that reason, anybody who knows me knows that I love to sit down and eat and talk and have friendships. And photography is just the vehicle. That day, though, you also showed me a book. I believe it might have been one of the custom made books by what's that place in Toronto, but Picto or whatever. One of those small books, and in it had snowflakes, and you had been working on snowflakes, and I had this idea for a book, and you showed me, and this was when we had you on the Photoshop show back then, which to this day remains one of the most watched YouTube videos I have. It's
Fantastic.
yeah, that was a fun time. But I want to fast forward us. That's how we met, and then you did the snowflakes, and you gained a level of notoriety. You had a coin minted. Did you have a stamp done as well?
No stamps, but I have had 2 coins minted
Two
from the Royal
coins
Canadian
minted.
Mint,
Yeah.
$20 pure silver coins, and so there's a feather in my cap, I suppose. But yeah, the idea of snowflakes. You know, I was
I
working
can
at
screen
a
share while you talk. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I had a boring office job, and that was, you know, advertising agency for some financial planning companies, and it was just so dry, and I really didn't want to be there. But at the end of you know, one boring day, I had just purchased a new camera lens, the Canon MPE 65 millimeter macro lens, and you know, you'd be amazed how interesting just the office supply stuff is. Like corkboard is actually organic, right? And so the closer you get, you actually get to see the cells in the cork, and, you know, piles of staples or the tip of a ballpoint pen or all these things was fantastic. But that day, it was snowing outside, and I went outside, and you know, I still have the original black mitten that I used as a background. It's kind of
Oh,
bedraggled now. It's because
it
it spent a
trickled.
lot of time out in the winter. I think squirrels attacked it or something. But um, my grandmother had given me that mitten as a well, I mean, a set of them. uh, Give them to all of her grandkids to just, you know, keep in your car in case you get broken down on a, you know, remote road, and, you know, grandparents worry. And so, yeah, thank you, grandma. And they were in my car, and I grabbed one because I wanted a black background. And so far, I'm going to say 99.999% of the snowflakes that I have photographed have been made on that black mitten. Um,
Wow.
because it just offered the right contrast, you know, the dark color, but
Yeah.
also it lifted it away from the background. And in macro photography, one of the things that is a huge challenge is depth of field.
Yes.
And the closer you get, the shallower that depth is. And lifting the snowflake away from the background actually makes the background completely out of focus,
Yeah.
and also functions as an insulator. So I have spent a lot of time over the past 10 years photographing snowflakes, and
Yeah.
they're all focus stacked, which is a, you know, it's a technical process to increase the depth of field across the entire way. The snowflake that I had just sent you, and I think you were sharing one of,
Yeah. I can
was
share
one of
that
the,
now. You
yeah, it
just
was one of the biggest and best ones that I've ever photographed, and that was just this year. Having spent thousands of hours with the subject across more than a decade, and I'm still finding new things to explore and to push limits. This one, I think, was 87 separate images focus stacked together. Um, Using a fairly high resolution camera, 47 megapixel camera body. So,
wow.
you know,
That
lots of
would have been
number
a
crunching
massive
to
file.
create something like that. But every time I go outside, I still see new things. I mean, not every time, but the joy 2 feet from my back door to constantly find new experimental photography things is wonderful. And in fact, right now, we're in June, but I have a chest freezer. And in that chest freezer, I have a heated dog bowl. And that heated dog bowl has just plain like distilled water inside of it. And if you're unfamiliar with these contraptions, if you have a dog that you leave outside in the wintertime, this gives them drinkable liquid water. It just warms it up enough so that it stays liquid. So that's evaporating in a like minus 30-degree environment. And then it immediately starts to crystallize on whatever it hits. So I'm
Wow.
growing like this frost forest in there right now that maybe give it another 24 or 48 hours and I'll get in there and
Wow.
photograph it. So, don't be bound by the seasons, folks.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. And I just want to add, for those who aren't familiar with the method of focus stacking, it just takes those stacked images, like you said, at that one was over 80 images. Some are maybe only 3 or 4 images. You take images that are focused at different points through the image, then stack them, and then software takes all the sharpest aspects, hopefully all the sharpest aspects of each image, and pushes it together into one file.
And you can
And
do it
I
in
won't get into
Photoshop.
the details of it, but you
I mean,
focus stack by hand, right? Like when you're doing
well, for
snowflakes.
snowflakes, I do absolutely,
Yeah.
because I have to rotate the camera around. Imagine the snowflake being the center of rotation in order to get the lighting to be the right angle and everything, with a ring flash on the end of the camera. So I've got to do that handheld, and it surprises people at first, but then once you try it, it's actually not that difficult, because if you hold the end of the lens with your left hand, or the end of your ring flash or whatever you have there, and you rest that hand on the surface that you're photographing on, your working distance is so small that you can do that successfully, and then your hand becomes sort of like a monopod,
Yeah.
and it's almost like you can pull back with your right hand and push forward with your left hand, and kind of create a bit of tension on the camera, and then all you have to do is just alleviate one or the other, and the camera just kind of slides forward and backward,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I can just barely, like, I'm over exaggerating the amount of motion that I would be making,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
by
just
moving that.
very, it's like quite minimal. Yeah.
It's quite minimal. Now you can use tripods and focusing rails, and I do that as well, especially if my
Yeah.
subject allows for it.
Yeah.
And there's some great automated focusing rails on the market now that are much less expensive than they used to be. I think Macro has one. I haven't used that yet, but it's a couple of $100. And it's just, you plug in the starting point, the ending point, the number of frames that you want to take across the way, and it just moves the camera and automatically takes the images. Really simplifies the whole
Oh, wow.
process.
Wow.
Of course, my favorite is one from Novoflex, which costs €1,800. But it's like the law of diminishing returns with any camera gear
Yeah.
that
You
you
get to a
buy.
point where how much do you need
It's like,
to
okay,
get to
well,
your
I can
final
spend
result?
10 times I can add a zero to the price tag of the camera, but I'm not going to get 10 times the camera for that.
Yes. So you made a statement when we were chatting just before things started, and you said, life, the most wonderful kind of chaos.
Yeah.
And I thought that's profound. That's kind of what life has been like, hasn't it? This particular season in our lives, some of us have used all this apparent free time to work on projects. And you have a project you've just released. So I don't want to wait too long to get into that, because it's so deep and rich and full of information. And so I'm just going to point out that the reason I had these on at the start of the show has to do with this new book. So Don, tell us a little bit about this book. And the reason I had those glasses on, I just want to point out this one chapter, because it's the fun part. Who remembers 3D imagery? And so he's got a whole chapter on 3D
How you
imagery,
do it.
and you need to wear the glasses to see this stuff. It's just phenomenal. So, I mean, I
Well,
opened up the
Ron,
book.
we're three-dimensional creatures here. We've got two
Yeah.
eyes, you know, and so to pigeonhole yourself into a photographer with one lens kind of does a disservice to our senses. And it's easier to do this than you would have ever thought. But people think that it's difficult, or they just don't even know how the puzzle pieces come together. There's free software out there called Stereo Photo Maker to combine multiple images together. I mentioned focusing rails a second ago. If you have one of them and you put the camera sideways on it, so instead of going into the subject, it just moves horizontally. Take one picture in one position, move the camera a little bit to the side, take a photo in another position, you automatically have a stereoscopic set of images, and you can combine them together. And I've trained myself to cross my eyes to see in 3D. I have antique stereoscopes, but like you were saying, just the classic red blue anaglyph glasses, they work. I mean, they're not
They're
fantastic, but
not great, but
everybody can do
it
it.
gives you the idea, right?
Exactly. And I love that experimental element of photography. In the 1950s, I think stereoscopic 3D was huge, and then it kind of fell away again. And then there was 3D TVs that were a big thing for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and then it faded away again.
Yeah.
But um, who remembers having those glasses and a book full of interesting images as a
Oh
kid,
yeah.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
just so much fun. And Ron, I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm going to assume that you opened the box, you saw the red blue anaglyph glasses, and you immediately looked through the book to see where you would find the use for those. Is that true?
Of course. It's like, where can I see? What do I got to see? Like, as soon as you see these, you're going, oh, this is going to be fun. And
Yeah, but
it's
that's only one small
nostalgic.
chapter at the end of
So
the book. It
that's
was
right. But it gets you to open the book. And
it
what I
gets you to
did,
open the
actually,
book.
what I did before I got the book was I went on to I believe it was Amazon, and I saw a little bit of the table of contents. And I'm just going to, I mean, I'm not going to bore you with everything in here, but I just want to read a couple of things. The technical basics, composition, water droplet reflections, ultraviolet macro, bokeh, high magnification macro, snowflakes. I mean, go on and on and on and on. And there are 382 image and information rich pages. This book is worth 5 times its value or more.
That's
It's incredible.
it. And I wanted it to be perfect, and it was aiming to come out in the winter of 2019, but I just didn't want to rush it. I wanted to give it enough time to fully mature, and then the pandemic hit, and
Yeah.
I had to switch gears entirely. I mean, I
Yes.
had the crowdfunding money, and that's just kind of sitting in the bank, and that's great. And I have a book that's like maybe 80 or 90% done, but I don't have the mental space anymore with my daughter and my wife at home constantly.
No, no.
To write something that's technical but everybody can understand takes like 6 hours where nobody bugs me, and my
Yeah.
phone is on airplane mode and my email is closed, and you kind of have to zen out a little bit to figure this stuff out. I didn't have
Yeah.
a single day of that in 2020. So that was a challenge, but as you can see, the challenge has been overcome, and it is the biggest accomplishment in my professional career to make this book. So
I'm going to do a screen share while we talk again, and we're going to go back to this, but we're going to go to the other images, which some are featured in the book as well. And let me just, pull out a full screen here. And yeah, I should have all of this completely ready. Just use my shortcuts. And I'm just going to kind of gloss through some of these images. Clearly, you have developed your skill set to the point of mastery. Like there's anybody who looks at these will understand, anybody who's even attempted macro or focus stacking or anything like that will see the level of mastery in like these are bubble snow or soap bubble macro
soap bubble,
images.
And pro tip, you can also make them in a chest freezer. I have
Hey, there
confirmed
you go.
evidence that is a possibility too.
This is probably one of my favorites for a couple of reasons, but one is I really, really love the color wheel and opposite colors. It's one of my signature moves in developing images. And this one just like nails it so well.
Part of that too, Ron, and you're right, and that's why I went to this particular flower. But a lot of macro photography is ingredient gathering, right? You're constantly looking around you to see what's going to work with what, and you can be the artist. You can put, like in this case, I can go and buy a Gerbera daisy, in the flower store, and just stick it outside for an hour, and it'll turn into a chunk of flower-shaped ice.
Yeah.
And then I can get a freezing bubble to kind of grow on top of that too. These are manufactured images in the sense that you're not gonna walk down a wintry trail all of a sudden and come back with
Yeah.
this beautiful image and say, "Oh, everybody, you won't guess what I found out there." No, you have to be the artist creating some of these scenes and these setups, like this green immigrant leaf weevil floating on a flower. And it's that exact same color of Gerbera daisy that's in the background in this image, just for color.
Wow.
It's floating on the surface of water, and the background added just that nice complementary colorness to it, but also understanding what's going to happen when that flower is free floating. It's going to play with the surface tension of the water. And
Yes.
so the water's going to bend around a little bit. And so the angle of reflection is going to change. And you're going to get these patterns and these rings that show up on the surface of the water to create that. Now, stronger reflections like this are obtained when you get as close to the surface of the water as
Yeah.
possible. So
You're
the
practically
water
getting your lens
is
wet. Yeah.
Exactly. I think I actually shot this with a vintage lens because a lot of old lenses have really narrow barrels to them.
Yes.
And so that allowed me to, number one, get closer to the surface of the water than I would with a big honking modern lens. But also, if I got it wet and broke it, I wouldn't really care that much. So yeah, that was done with a vintage optic, and that weevil, I mean, he's got wings. He could fly away. He was as enamored with this scenario as I was. And so we got the shot.
Wow. And so this is all about the nostalgia. Maybe the reason I get so excited, Don, is I remember being a kid playing. I loved insects in the natural world. I loved science. I loved the glasses, and weevils were actually one of my favorite little creatures, especially the iridescent ones. And it just to see this just brings back that childhood fascination with the natural
Oh,
world.
I would, like, as a child, I was the same, Ron. Like we're like, we might not be a complete generation apart. We might be, but we're definitely of the same childhood.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I remember my dad just gave me some empty film canister to collect bugs with. And
yes.
I went out and I found one of these green iridescent beetles, and I stuck him in the film canister and I took him home. I was so excited, and as soon as I opened it up, he was dead. And I was ready to show this
Devastating.
thing off, but I guess a tiny enclosed black container in the heat is not really a friendly
Probably
thing.
not a
So
good thing for them. Yeah,
the 8-year-old me was quite disappointed in that moment.
yeah. I remember gathering fireflies in glass containers, and the first time I saw fireflies and all those things. This next
That's
image,
a
I
subject that I
just
want to, before you go into the next image,
yeah,
bioluminescence is something that I
yeah.
really want to explore, and I haven't yet. And that could be
Wow,
fireflies, right? To really
yeah,
make a firefly's light the light source in a photograph would be
wow.
phenomenal.
That would
Um,
be crazy.
and our technology is getting to the point where that might be possible soon. But
Oh,
also,
exciting.
I have somewhere in my closet, I have a type of mushroom that is bioluminescent and edible too. There's the one species of mushroom that's both edible and bioluminescent, and it's not toxic or hallucinogenic in any way.
Oh, really?
Um,
Because I thought maybe that might have got Alice down the rabbit hole. I don't know.
no, I don't think I'm going to eat them, but wouldn't it be fun to shoot a time lapse video of bioluminescent mushrooms growing, right? There's just so
Oh my
many cool
goodness.
ideas to explore.
Yeah. So I'll go back to that share.
Yeah.
Speaking of things like different light wavelengths and things like that, because you can talk about that here, I think.
Yeah, so this is a shot done in ultraviolet fluorescence, which is totally easy for everybody to do. All you need is an ultraviolet flashlight, and you can get them for $50 to $70 or so for a decent one that doesn't have a lot of spill off into the visible spectrum. What you're seeing here is an ever-bearing garden variety sunflower. It's normally a
Mm,
dark center
yeah,
with yellow petals. But what happens when ultraviolet light hits it is it excites the electrons and the atoms in the subject, and they go to a higher orbit. I'm being technical for a reason because I'm going to distill this down to something super simple.
sure.
It excites the electrons. They go into a higher orbit. They can't stay there for very long. In fact, it's an almost immediate decay back down to where they were before, and they release the energy. But something was used in the process, and so it's lower energy light that comes off of it. So ultraviolet light, very high energy. You hit the subject with that light, and visible light bounces back to the camera. So you are capturing visible light, but uh, you're doing so in a very novel way. When people think ultraviolet photography, they think, oh, well, I'm going to need special filters. I'm going to need to modify my camera. I'm going to need, a lens made of quartz and all that. That's if you want to capture ultraviolet light directly. And there can be patterns in flowers and things that you can see that might be worth it, but in my experience, it's not. All you need to do this is an ultraviolet flashlight. No filters, no special lenses or
Oh,
modifications to your
wow.
camera. It's all your existing camera equipment because functionally, you're collecting regular plain old light. It's just created in a very science fiction-y type of way. I'm just in a dark room. I just tape some garbage bags over the windows. My neighbors probably think that I'm quite creepy when I do that. But I just create a completely dark room, and that allows me to make images just like this.
Wow. That's fascinating and encouraging to try and go and experiment and just do these things. Just do them.
With that flashlight, I'll typically take it out into the gardens at night, once a week or two, just to see what's glowing in the garden, and then make a note of it and come back and take that into the studio the next day. Um,
Wow.
but this image, and I'm so glad that we get to talk about this one. This one is technically not a macro photograph, and it's technically not focus stacked either. So in this regard, it's just two dandelion seeds emerging from the surface of water with a Gerbera daisy in behind. I love those daisy-like flowers, and you can get them with all different colored centers and so on. But what you're seeing here is an image taken with a Lumix 24 to 105 kit lens. And I had the Canon 24 to 105 kit lens before that too. But what's becoming more and more commonplace, and I really hope that it's on more cameras in the future, is a high resolution mode. So if you're buttoned down on a tripod, I can quadruple the resolution of my camera. It'll activate this mode. It'll take 8 separate shots. I think Sony cameras do 16. Olympus has a mode that does as few as 5. I'm shooting with Panasonic. I think Fuji's even rolled it out to their GFX medium format camera line. So
Wow.
it's becoming more commonplace where you can quadruple the resolution of your camera sensor. That takes 47 megapixels and turns it into 187 megapixels, which is stupid. I don't need 187 megapixels for anything, not even if I was, having fun with a 4x5 camera, which you've known me to
Yeah.
do. But the idea is I can throw those pixels away that I don't need. The majority of my professional career, I shot with 20-ish megapixel cameras. So if I
Yes.
throw, 90% of 187 megapixel camera image away, I still have enough to work with, so long as they're good pixels. The thing
Yeah.
about macro photography we mentioned earlier, the closer you get, the shallower your depth of field becomes. So what if
Mhm.
I intentionally get farther away and crop in? That's
Ah,
exactly what I did for this shot. So this is cropped in from
interesting.
187 megapixels with a non-macro lens using that high resolution mode, which made it super easy to deal with in
Oh, wow.
post-processing because I didn't have to deal with any of the focus stacking stuff that
That's
otherwise
incredible.
I would have to do.
But you would need a rock solid tripod. Like you don't want like a whisper
Yeah.
of movement.
Well, and so a lot of those are done in the studio too, where the wind can't knock against anything, and so that's pretty cool. And this image is one of the most recent shots that I've taken. I was sort of inspired when Earth Day came around, and back in 2012, sort of maybe around the same time that we had met. I found a printed map, or I found a map of the Earth from NASA's public domain archives, and I printed it off and I put the Earth in a water droplet, and that was fun. But I wanted to revisit that because it feels almost like every year the Earth is hanging by an ever so dwindling thread, and the fragility of it and everything else is becoming more and more important to the world. So I took some flower petals and I spent like an hour or two trying to get them to kind of stay into this heart shape. They just kept bouncing back open. And it ended up being that in order to get them to stay there, the droplet had to be there. It's weighing them closed together. So here I am trying to pinch the petals together while I've got a hypodermic needle in the other hand, and I'm trying to place a droplet at the center of the heart area there, and it stayed together just barely long enough to get this image.
Got your exposure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful and very symbolic. Definitely.
Yeah.
And so the last image we have here is another one with a different light spectrum.
Yeah, and again, ultraviolet fluorescence. Pollen in a lot of flowers will fluoresce quite heavily, and so when you see, it doesn't apply to every flower, but a lot of things in the buttercup family, hellebores, sunflowers, daisy-like flowers will often be quite fluorescent. And this one, I intentionally cut its stem to be super short and stuck it in a bowl of water so the flower would mature before it would wilt. The longer stemmed flowers would typically wilt faster because they've been cut, and so it matured and started spewing out all of this pollen, which functions as the light source in the image. It is literally glowing from within, and some of the setups that I work with, they don't require a lot of technical knowledge. They just require a lot of what if guesses. And sometimes they fail miserably. I mean,
but that's how you find out. I mean,
well, exactly. And so I was so sure. I mean, the hubris I had when I saw a forsythia shrub in our backyard starting to bloom the first year that we bought this house, and I set up the studio space, got my ultraviolet lights ready, the camera ready, the little clamp to hold the branch, and I knew it was going to be magic. And I went out and I snipped off a branch of it, and those flowers didn't glow at all. In fact, the bark of the stem twig thing that it was fluorescing far more vibrantly than the flowers themselves. And I was like, okay, you just check yourself, check your expectations here. It's not going to work every time. And to that end, I've learned to embrace that, to say that I embrace the answer, not if it actually becomes anything magical, but it becomes a puzzle piece approach, right? You go out there, you grab a little bit of knowledge, and that knowledge might lead to new ideas. It might lead to a successful image down the road, but I never start into a project with the expectation of getting anything useful right away. I go into it with the expectation of knowledge as a stepping stone towards what that future image is going to be, knowing that it's typically going to take 3 or 4 different iterations for me to get there. And so to that end, I just revel in my mistakes. I don't want to call them failures, because a failure is a mistake you learn nothing from. So it's just, you have to fail. But not fail, because again, you have to continuously learn. But if I were to show you all of my images that on their own had no further action been taken from them, you would say, this guy sucks. He's not a good photographer at all.
I have a feeling if you looked into any of us as pros into our entire collections, you took out all the keepers and what the public sees, you would say, this guy sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get back to talking about the book. I'm actually very curious about a book of this magnitude because, um, like you said, you have to block out time, 6 hours at a time to focus on specific uh, ways to describe. This is really a labor of love, and in the book, there's so much that can be learned. It's not just doesn't just make a great coffee table book. It's a companion for creativity.
Oh,
It
there's
really is
90,000 words in there.
yeah, yeah. It's not what you expect. It's not a picture book, although it has amazing pictures. It's a creative book. It's an inspiration book. It's an information book. One of the questions I have, besides what's the best place people can go and get this ordered, the other question is, so answer that first. The other question is going to be, what what was your biggest obstacle to overcome in creating something like this? So the first question is, where can people get this?
People
The
can get
second
that
is,
at skycrystals.ca. That is the domain where my first book was hosted, Sky Crystals, obviously, and I'm piggybacking off of the website there. And so,
and it's
if you were
right there.
to
And I know on the first,
if
if
you
you
were to
click
click
on
on
that,
oh, and that's my website, doncom.ca, and that
yeah,
brings you to the Kickstarter page, and then you can click on the little pre-order the book now button, and you
right
can
there.
get in there.
I also saw
Um,
that B&H has it available for pre-order for our American
B&H
friends.
has it available as well. They don't have
That's
any
pretty
in stock
cool.
yet because I'm not shipping anything to retailers until I'm done
Yeah,
with all of my pre-orders. I think that's the ethical thing to do. So
that's right.
they'll have that at the Camera Store out in Calgary, Alberta. We'll get some copies as well.
Oh, good,
Got a
good.
PO from them. So yeah, it will get around to some of those locations. But if you do want one now, well, I hope you've already pre-ordered it. If not, pre-order it now.
Yeah,
Because I'm shipping them in the order of which they have been, the orders have been received. Um, and, you know, Ron, I could have printed this book in kind of a really half-assed way. I could have, had it manufactured in China. I could have let it go out with a bunch of typos and everything. It is fact-checked. It is grammar-checked. It was printed here in Canada, in Manitoba, at one of the best presses that we have in this country, and that actually cost me quite a bit more.
yeah.
But you see it in the finished product. It was
No,
definitely
it's
worthwhile.
immediately, when I opened it, it was immediately evident that the book is substantial and very well made. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. And like I did with my first book, I also did a limited edition leatherbound copy as well, that has an extra 16 pages at the end of just experiments I might not have successfully completed yet. Really niche things like sending 30,000 volts through a flower. That you really don't
That's-
want the entire public that's buying the book to have access to that knowledge, because that might be somewhat dangerous. So. Yeah.
that's a good idea. So what would be the in putting this together? What was the biggest obstacle? Do you feel like, I know in your first book you did a first run, and because of the amount of black ink needed, you ran into a snag there. You learned a valuable lesson in your
Oh,
first
the
book.
entire thing had to be reprinted,
Yeah,
and the entire project was nearly scrapped as a result of that. And it was a tragedy averted at the 11th hour. But so I knew now, from the production side of things, all the hiccups, and I'm not going to fall through that. But really, it was I. If this book was published by a publishing company, it would not be the book that it is. They would trim it down. They would make it more
yeah,
mainstream. They'd cut the production quality and paper thickness or whatever else,
yeah,
or only make it a paperback or something. So I wanted this to be the best book it could be, but also not, sort of like I did with my first book. I wrote it for me, as if I was the one that wanted to read it, right? Like, in terms of giving as much knowledge as possible. And to write it from that perspective, it has to be conversational, yet
yeah.
it also has to be ultimately informative. And so, to kind of ride the line of formality and informality in the language and keeping that consistent, while I'm constantly, chasing after a 5-year-old, and it's so, to kind of keep myself in the proper space to do it was tricky. But if you've ever attempted to write a book, you realize that there's knowledge that you don't have when it comes time to put 100% of it on the table. And so it was kind of tricky. There was one part in the book where I'm talking about cross polarization, and there's some really fun experiments you can do with just a plate of glass and some lemon juice and a couple of polarizing filters, and or citric acid if you wanted to get it specifically. Health food stores will sell it, and so it's an easy thing to set up and experiment with, and it creates abstract artwork that is it rivals what my wife does with oil paints, and she's quite upset about that she might spend three days solid trying to make this beautiful painting, and it's stunning, but I might just put a solution of citric acid and water on a plate of glass and go to bed and wake up and I'm done. But to describe what was happening in that process, like how two polarizers in opposition actually function like a variable neutral density filter. And so if you put them in complete opposition, it becomes dark. But then if something in between the two of them mucks with the direction of light, and to describe that in a way that over 3 or 4 paragraphs would normally be like a graduate level university physics class. That, I mean, I don't know either, and I keep having to talk to the scientists people and saying, am I describing this right? Is the light really doing a strange unpredictable corkscrew thing? And they said, yeah, more or less. So a lot of that was just trying to make it approachable, to make all the content as approachable as possible was really the goal. So no matter where you were in your level of knowledge and skill, you could pick it up and understand what was going on.
Yeah. Wow. When I used to do professional copy work, we used cross polarization. And when people ask me today, I got this artwork that's really shiny and it's oil painting, how do I photograph it? I don't even want to mention cross polarization, because to even begin to try and describe what it does and why that's what you need.
Polarize the light source, put them on like 45-degree angles to the subject, polarize the camera.
You can get it so it just lets enough shine or a little shine. I kind of use the analogy of blinds allowing only one direction of wavelength, but people don't understand. And but I remember I had to use it because you may not be old enough, but I think some of the people that'll watch this are old enough to remember the school pictures that were full of little bumps, and they made these little bumps so you wouldn't copy the pictures, right?
So it would be very hard to copy it, right?
Yeah, and so to get around that, to get a reasonable copy of these, not perfect, but reasonable, we used cross polarization, which allowed us to get a less bumpy looking image without specular highlights on the little bumps. So, yeah.
I didn't realize that makes perfect sense that technique could be used for that as well. I've done some very big artwork reproduction jobs myself, and I've even used the high resolution mode in my cameras to get extreme resolution on this stuff. And the thing, though, at least with my camera, is it requires a continuous light source. And I was digging through a whole bunch of vintage camera stuff that they'll occasionally give me just like a box of old camera stuff, old cameras, lights, whatever. I'll take it all. And I found this old, something like 300 or 400 watt bulb that, it's an always on bulb. And so made a mistake in trying to put polarizing film in front of that, because it caught on fire.
It's not flame proof.
Yeah. So lessons learned.
It's not
all
inexpensive
the time.
Either. You got to pay a little bit to get it, a good size
Actually,
sheet of it.
to make it properly, and this is a pro tip for just about anybody out there. To get the optical grade stuff, it's expensive. But to get something a little bit subpar that's good enough for the lights, if you search on eBay for replacement polarizing film for TVs, you can get big, like 32-inch diagonal sheets of the stuff for about $10.
Wow, that's a deal, because it's 10 times perfect. And more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
one square sheet. Yeah.
So much to my dismay, when I set one of those on fire. And then when I went to go and find cheaper alternatives because I was afraid I might do the same, then there you have it.
Yeah, you have it. And if you don't need to get maximum removal of reflections, you could use a less expensive alternative.
Yeah, or even if you have a polarizing filter like a 77-inch or 77 millimeter filter, if you got two of them, you can even just gaffer's tape one to a flash head. And
I've done that. I've hacked it with these two little Soligar lights on little slave units, and put
there you go.
Put them on and die. But you can't see what you're getting. You got to take pictures, to see what you're getting. So you don't get to shoot it through a modeling light. Anyway, we can go down the science of all that. I didn't want to go too deep on that, but it's just an example of this amazing thing we call photography. It's equal amounts of science and art. And I think that's why guys like you and I are so magnetically drawn to this craft, because we both have a background in nature and in science and biology. We love these things and to explore these things, and we love the expression of them later as they create outcomes. And Don, you, without reservation, are and have become a master of this. And your books and your podcasts and the work that you've produced speaks to that. Now, I just want to recommend to anybody who would, don't hesitate to invest what I think is a small purchase amount for a book of such incredible value. And you can go to doncom.ca. That's DONKOM.ca. And Don, what are some other ways people can stay in touch with you? Because I know you do workshops when we're allowed again, and you have a podcast. How can we stay in touch?
Yeah, so my podcast is mostly weekly. Right now, it's hard to find the time getting all the books out the door, but that's photogeekweekly.com. So photogeekweekly.com. And me and a guest typically talk about just any photo industry stuff that happened in the week. It could be ethical or copyright stuff. It could be new technology and patents. It could be new camera announcements and everything else in between. All the geeky stuff. And so if you want to hear my voice opine about such things, that's where you'll find it. But yeah, workshops, when they are running again, you'll be able to find them at doncom.ca. And in fact, I'm even thinking of doing some travel workshops as well, possibly in Bulgaria, where my wife is originally from, to do a combination of, waterfall and cave and natural, like mountaintop landscape photography stuff with a macro component in there as well. I'm still working through the specifics and the timelines for that. Nothing is going to be posted until we're completely on the other side of the pandemic. But there's going to be some fun stuff to be had there.
I really encourage you to do that, especially on location. I know that there is a world of people itching to have experiences and to travel. I have friends from Nematosaurus, Alicia and Jared. I met them in Antarctica, and they were debating whether they're even going to go back into business into travel and travel writing and blogging. And they made a decision to launch their first travel/workshop in Antarctica on a massive 20-day journey, and it sold out in 12 hours.
Fantastic.
And I don't know if you understand the cost of that. That's, they have a large audience, but the cost of a trip like that is not small.
It's one of the most expensive.
Yeah, there's not many more expensive than that. And so that's very encouraging for the travel industry, that when we can travel again, I think the idea of a location style workshops for you would be fantastic. Anyway, Don, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me today. We can't be strangers for very much longer. We'll be able to visit again. It's been a while.
It has been. Looking forward to seeing you in person at some point soon.
And I look forward to having you back on where we can talk about all kinds of other things. So thanks for joining me.
I'll set flowers on fire next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for those who have watched, and I'll see you in the stream.